After decades of experience in the field of diving and excelling in it in every way possible, 1994, Sheck Exley was finally ready to dive for one last time before his retirement on April 6th. However, this wasn't going to be just any other dive. Exley, who had broken several records and set many new ones, wanted to end his career with a dive that no other person in the world had attempted or even thought of. The plan was simple: to dive to a depth of 1,000 feet in a freshwater sinkhole in Mexico known as Zacaton. When everything seemed perfect with Exley extremely close to achieving his goal, everything began to go wrong, turning this record-breaking dive into a terrifying accident that caused Exley's death. So, what exactly happened? How did Exley die in Zacaton? And was his body ever recovered? This is the horrifying story of Sheck Exley's fatal dive in the Zacaton sinkhole. Exley and diving. Now, there are some in the cave diving industry who are truly considered the pioneers, and Sheck Exley was certainly one of them. Born in April 1949, this American cave diver started diving when it wasn't even considered a proper career. In fact, Exley was the first person in the world to complete a tally of 1,000 underwater dives. In his illustrious 23-year career, he expertly completed 3,000 dives, each one more challenging and dangerous than the last. Throughout this time, he gained so much knowledge about deep water diving that he became the inventor of several pieces of equipment and techniques that are still used in deep water diving today. The Zacaton. Located in the Aldama municipality in Tamaulipas, Mexico, the Zacaton is the deepest of the 5 cenotes found on a large ranch known as El Rancho Azafroza in northeastern Mexico. It is one of the deepest known freshwater sinkholes in the world. Zacaton was discovered by Jim Bowden and Ann Kristovich while they were surveying various diving sites in the area. With its astonishing depth of 339 meters, 1,112 feet, and crystal clear water, this location has been famous among the global diving community for years. From the surface, this sinkhole appears to be a calm lake, but beneath this calmness lies a vast network of dark and deep passages and chambers that can send shivers down a diver's spine. What's even scarier is that these chambers have never been thoroughly explored due to their depth. According to local folklore, Zacaton is believed to be the hiding place of an underwater monster that engulfs anyone who dares to dive deep. Background. In 1993, Bowden continued his exploration of the unexplored caves in Mexico under his project Proyecto, this time accompanied for a week by his longtime friend and diving expert, Sheck Exley. After checking most of the caves off their list, the duo set their sights on Zacaton. From the surface, and based on what they'd heard from the locals, this sinkhole seemed like all the others they'd encountered in the area. However, Zacaton ended up being a big surprise. On their first dive, Exley reached a depth of 407 feet, while Bowden dived to 258 feet. Neither diver could see the bottom from their respective positions. Previously, it was believed that Zacaton's depth was only 250 feet, but their dive revealed the earlier calculations were incorrect, further intriguing them. The next day, the duo returned with their team to accurately measure the sinkhole's depth. A weighted line was dropped, and after passing the depth of 500, 800, and even 1,000 feet, it finally stopped, hitting the bottom at the astonishing depth of 1,112 feet. This discovery shocked Exley, Bowden, and their team, as they had just found the deepest sinkhole in the world. A day later, the duo returned with proper gear and dived into the sinkhole once again. This time, Bowden reached a depth of 504 feet, while Exley descended to 271 feet. Interestingly, these were the first sub-500 feet dives at that location, and neither diver experienced any difficulties or physiological issues during descent or ascent. This further boosted their confidence. After that, their week of exploration came to an end, but they promised each other they would return to Zacaton within a year. Exley's quest for glory. Now, returning to Exley, by 1994, Sheck Exley had already established himself as a pioneer in the world of deep diving. At that time, no other diver was as experienced as he was. This fact becomes even more evident considering that, in 1994, Exley held the record for the top 3 deepest dives in the world, one of which reached a depth of 881 feet. However, despite these accomplishments, Exley still believed he could achieve more. At 45 years old, he was keenly aware that his retirement was approaching, but he wanted to conclude his diving career with a memorable dive. This ambition once again led him to the Zacaton sinkhole, where he aimed to break his own record and set a new one by reaching the almost unthinkable depth of 1,000 feet. To accomplish this challenging task, Exley made plans with his friend and fellow diver, Jim Bowden. Together, they spent weeks training for the dive, creating detailed plans, completing numerous practice dives, and performing elaborate exercises to prepare for the depth of 1,000 feet. The diving team included Exley, Bowden, their wives, and several other divers who would be stationed at the surface in case of any emergencies. According to the plan, the duo was supposed to enter the sinkhole through a nearby spring and swim through a 600-foot tunnel that would lead them to the main sinkhole. Jim was arranged to go first, with Sheck following a few seconds later. The descent would be rapid, with a total time to reach the bottom of the sinkhole estimated to be just above 10 to 13 minutes. At the bottom, Sheck would touch the surface, set the record, and then the duo would immediately begin their ascent. To ensure safe descent and ascent, 2 weighted ropes were positioned in the sinkhole. For this unprecedented dive, Exley and Bowden prepared a total of 30 gas cylinders containing 6 different mixtures of nitrogen, oxygen, and helium. Their calculations estimated that the ascent alone would take approximately 10 hours, requiring multiple tank changes and precise gas management. The fateful dive. On the morning of April 6, 1994, Exley and Bowden initiated their historic dive, surrounded by a crowd of media and local spectators. After entering the sinkhole through the tunnel, they began their descent at precisely 9:45 a.m. The initial stages of the dive went according to plan, with the divers using compressed air up to a depth of 300 feet. They then switched to Heli-Air, a mixture of helium and regular air, and further transitioned to Trimix, a blend of helium, oxygen, and nitrogen after another 300 feet as they descended deeper. For a while, everything proceeded smoothly, but around the 750-foot mark, Jim Bowden began experiencing issues. Firstly, he noticed that his descent rate was much faster than intended. Secondly, he felt his body shaking and realized he was breathing too much air from his cylinder. All of this indicated that Bowden was experiencing severe symptoms of high-pressure nervous syndrome, HPNS. This condition, characterized by tremors, disorientation, and cognitive impairment, was evident in Bowden's shaking and rapid breathing of helium. Unaware of his partner's condition, Exley continued his descent and soon passed by Bowden. Seeing his partner continue downward, Bowden decided to end his break and push on toward the bottom. At approximately the 900 feet mark, Bowden checked his air supply gauge and realized he had already used a significant portion of his gas reserves. This meant that if he continued the descent, he wouldn't have enough air to make it back to the surface. With no other options left, Bowden decided to return to the surface after reaching 925 feet. He activated his buoyancy device and began the ascent, but it seemed like his problems were far from over. At approximately 450 feet, just as his air supply was about to run out, he spotted an emergency cylinder. He quickly grabbed the cylinder, but the regulator wasn't functioning, and despite multiple attempts, he couldn't get it to work. With his oxygen levels dropping rapidly, he tucked the cylinder under his arm and started swimming upward. To breathe, he would open the valve for a quick breath and then close it immediately. Fortunately, he only had to do this until he reached the 300-foot mark, where another emergency cylinder awaited him, this time with a working regulator. The disappearance and search efforts. On one hand, Bowden was making his challenging ascent, while on the other hand, the support team on the surface anxiously awaited signs from both divers. To estimate the divers' positions, the support team monitored the bubbles rising from the ropes. The team had calculated that the bubbles would disappear once the divers crossed the 250-foot mark, only to reappear after 14 to 18 minutes, indicating that they had completed the descent. After the estimated time, bubbles started to surface above Bowden's rope, signaling that he was ascending, but there were no signs of bubbles above Exley's rope. The absence of bubbles suggested that something had gone terribly wrong at the extreme depth. When there was still no sign of Exley after several minutes, support staff member Ann Kristovich and Bowden's wife, Karen Hole, exchanged concerned glances, acknowledging that something wasn't right. The group had previously discussed that if anything appeared to be wrong, a diver from the support team would swim to a specific mark to meet the duo. Ann quickly suited up, and with an extra tank, headed straight to the 47-minute mark. While she was relieved to find Bowden safe and sound, her deepest fears began to materialize as there was no sign of Exley. Up until this point, Exley's wife, Mary Allen, had not been aware of the problem. After some time, she surfaced, where Karen informed her of the situation. Wasting no time, Mary quickly donned her diving suit and swam towards the mark to assess the situation. Descending rapidly, she reached the 47-minute mark, but there was no sign of Exley. Growing more worried, she quickly wrote a message on her slate for Ann, explaining that she was going further down of 250 feet depth to look for any bubbles or light coming from the bottom. Meanwhile, at the depths of Zacaton, Bowden had also begun to worry about his friend. He moved towards Exley's rope, hoping to see some movement, but it remained completely still. Similarly, when he looked below, there was no sign of any light, bubbles, or anything indicating Exley's presence. When Ann reached the 250-foot mark, she too saw no sign of Exley. Their hopes soon turned to horror as the reality of Exley's potential death in the depths of the sinkhole became undeniable. Recovery of the body. After a tiring 10-hour decompression process, Bowden surfaced safely. He was informed of Exley's death when he reached the 60-foot mark. In the following days, efforts to retrieve Exley's body were postponed. In truth, the team had no intentions of recovering the body because, according to the divers, the only person capable of going that deep was already down there. With the available equipment and technology, recovering a body from a depth of more than 1,000 feet was considered an impossible task. Eventually, 3 days later, the team returned to the site to recover their equipment. When they began pulling up the ropes, they found them unusually heavy due to the attached cylinders. When the ropes were finally retrieved, Exley's body was discovered entangled with them, confirming their worst fears. What exactly happened? No one knows for sure what caused this incident, but over the years, several theories have attempted to explain Exley's tragic death. One prevailing theory suggests that Exley suffered a severe attack of high-pressure nervous syndrome, HPNS, leading to a loss of control and ultimately drowning. This theory is supported by the fact that Exley had previously experienced HPNS during another deep dive. Another theory posits that Exley's gas mixtures were improperly balanced, resulting in potentially fatal physiological effects. The fact that Exley's body was found entangled in the rope suggests a possible final attempt to signal for help or to facilitate recovery. Another plausible theory is that when Exley reached a certain depth, he was unable to inflate his buoyancy compensator, BC, with the compressed gas. To stabilize himself in the water, he may have used the rope and wrapped it around himself. This theory seems reasonable given Exley's extensive experience. It's difficult to believe that he would become entangled in his own rope. Moreover, the way the rope was wrapped around him doesn't appear to be an accidental entanglement. This situation, combined with HPNS, likely distracted him enough that he failed to check his gas supply levels, ultimately leading to his drowning. Conclusion. When reflecting on Exley's unfortunate death at the Zacaton, it's important to recognize a few key points. Firstly, despite his experience and expertise in the field, it's not a wise decision to continue the descent when his partner had stopped. Secondly, if Exley had already experienced conditions like HPNS in the past, then attempting a dive to a depth of 1,000 feet was indeed very dangerous. This incident underscores the importance of understanding the dangers associated with deep water diving. When you are hundreds of feet below the surface, anything can go wrong. And sometimes even your years of experience won't matter when a seemingly minor issue arises.